Relax now. Take a deep breath in and let it out slowly. Let your shoulders drop. Feel the weight of the day slowly drift away. There is no need to think too hard right now. You're safe. You're warm. Imagine the flickering glow of a small fire beside you. It crackles softly as the scent of earth and moss hangs gently in the night air. The leaves rustle faintly in a breeze that whispers stories from long ago. Stories of courage, of fear, of survival. Let your breathing slow with the rhythm of the wind. In and out, soft and steady. The world around you grows quieter, your eyelids heavier. The crackling of the hearth grows distant. The rustling leaves fade into silence. Our story today begins on a muddy stretch of land in northern France. It is the year 1916. The sky is low and grey, a heavy blanket that presses down over the scarred landscape. You can almost smell the damp earth, mixed with smoke, and something else, something metallic. It is the smell of war. The trenches run like great wounds across the countryside, zigzagging for miles, cut deep into the mud. Some of the men who live here call them the front lines. Others simply call them home, because they have no other place to go. This is where they eat, where they sleep, where they wait, and where they fight. You are now walking slowly through the trench. Feel the duckboards beneath your boots, slick with muck, and nearly swallowed by the ever-present mud. The walls on either side rise just high enough to shield you from the snipers beyond no man's land, and they are lined with sandbags, rotting wood, and the carved initials of those who once stood watch here. It is narrow, cramped, and cold, even when it is not raining, and it rains often. Everywhere you look, you see the toll of long months spent underground. Tattered canvas flaps as wind cuts through broken stretches of the parapet. A rat skitters across your path, its body fat and slick from feasting on crumbs, and other things best not thought about. The rats here grow as large as cats, and they fear nothing. They crawl over sleeping soldiers at night, nibbling on food rations, sometimes on fingers, sometimes worse. You pass a group of men huddled around a brazier, trying to coax warmth from the embers. Their faces are smeared with mud and soot, their eyes glassy, laughter rare. One of them peels off a damp sock and wrings it out. The water drips onto the boards below, joining the puddles that never seem to dry. Another scratches at his leg, where lice have burrowed beneath the seams of his uniform. Lice are constant companions in this place, tiny invaders that live in the folds of your clothes. They lay eggs in the seams, causing endless itching. Some men spend hours picking them off, only to find them back again the next morning. They call it chat. The constant picking, the conversations that fill the long hours. But no one really enjoys it. It is a war of attrition, against vermin, against the cold, against despair. And yet, somehow, the men keep going, and they sing songs from home, they write letters when they can, though the paper is often smudged and the ink runs in the damp. They carve names into rifle butts, into trench walls, into memory itself. Far ahead, a whistle blows, and for a moment, everything freezes. Is it a gas alert, a shift change, or something worse? You listen, hearts slowing to match the beat of the drips falling from the dugout ceiling. A man walks by with a canister, a metal tin held tight to his chest. Inside, precious clean socks, perhaps a bit of tobacco, or a letter from home. It is the little things that matter most out here. A chocolate bar, a dry blanket, a photograph. Each one a thread that ties you back to a world you can barely remember. At night, the trench comes alive with different sounds, footsteps on the duckboards, the distant rumble of artillery, the buzz of mosquitoes. The smell of cooking mingles with cordite and rot. And the men sit in near silence, passing tins of bully beef and hard biscuits between them. The food is meagre, often spoiled, but it is food, and in the dugouts, narrow holes cut into the trench wall and shored up with timber. You lie shoulder to shoulder with others. You try to sleep, but sleep comes in fits. Every distant boom of a shell rattles the walls. Some dream of home, others dream of nothing. There are men who wake screaming and their hands shaking and eyes wild. They do not talk about what they saw, but you all know, they call it shell shock. What happens when the mind cannot keep pace with what the eyes have seen? A man may begin the day whistling a tune from back home, and by nightfall he might be weeping in the corner of the dugout. There are no bandages for this, no splints, no stitches, just a quiet nod. a look of recognition, and maybe a hand on the shoulder. And then there is the rain, always the rain. It falls in sheets, in drizzles, in steady drops that seem to go on forever. It soaks into your boots, your coat, your bones. You're never dry, never warm, not truly. The mud is its own kind of enemy. Thick, greedy, relentless. It pulls at your feet, sucks at your boots. Sometimes it swallows men whole. You hear stories of men who slipped into shell holes and never came out again, the mud closing over them like a grave. But in the quiet moments, there is still something human here. You find a tin cup half buried in the wall, still warm from tea. You hear a soldier humming to himself as he cleans his rifle. Not because it is expected, but because it gives his hands something to do. You see two men playing cards, their faces lit by a single candle stub. They do not speak, but their presence is a kind of comfort. The trench is not only a place of fear, it is a place of waiting, of surviving, of being. And every day, the sun rises even if it does not shine. So breathe now, softly, deeply. Let the cold wind brush past you. Let the distant thump of artillery fade into the background. The earth may be scarred, but it still holds stories. And tonight, you're safe to listen. You're safe to sleep. Close your eyes now. Let the trench fade. Let the mud fall away. Let the whispering wind carry you further into stillness. You have walked through the front lines. You have seen what others only imagine, and you have made it to the end of the day. Let yourself rest. And so our story continues beneath a sky that does not change, where dawn and dusk blend into a smear of pale light and shadow, a place where time loses meaning and days melt into one another, in the same wet cold trench, the same shallow breath, beneath helmets streaked with mud. You wake not to sunlight, but to a sound, the heavy grumble of distant artillery. Again and again it echoes like the heartbeat of this strange world, and you sit up slowly, your back stiff, your boots still wet from yesterday, though the day never truly ends. And already your ears ring, not from noise, but from silence. The silence that lives between each explosion. In those short seconds your mind begins to wander, but the slap of a boot on wet wood brings you back, and the call for stand to rings out through the trench like the crow of a rooster on some long-forgotten farm. It is ritual, this moment, this rising every morning before light, because that is when the enemy comes. If he comes, and so rifles are checked, bayonets are fixed, men line up along the firing step, peering over the parapet into the greyness beyond no man's land, waiting for shadows that may or may not appear. There is no coffee, no breakfast, only the waiting. Sometimes for hours. Nothing happens, but you must stand all the same. Sometimes a flare shoots into the sky, a greenish burst that illuminates the world in ghostly colour, and for a moment the torn landscape looks like the moon, cratered, desolate, quiet. You hear whispers down the line, someone curses softly. Another man hums, and when stand to ends finally, you sink back down. Your legs already aching, your hands already numb, and the long day begins. Later in the morning a runner arrives, his boots caked in filth, and he brings orders from headquarters, tucked in a metal cylinder strapped to his chest. He does not speak much. His eyes are red from lack of sleep, and he smells of tobacco and old fear. He pauses just long enough to pass the message, then continues down the trench. Dodging soldiers and ducking low when the trench narrows, you think about how brave these runners are, how often they vanish between sectors, how little is left when they don't come back. You shake your head and turn away, and as you do, you catch sight of a small photograph wedged into a corner of the trench. It's yellowed from moisture, the edges curling. It shows a woman, maybe a wife or a sweetheart, smiling beside a dog in some sunny place that has nothing to do with war. You do not touch it because it is not yours, but you look for a moment longer and wonder if she still smiles like that. Later still there is work to be done, sandbags to refill barbed wire, to inspect latrines, to dig. You're handed a shovel and you trudge to the edge of the trench. Where the wall is sagging, you dig slowly, carefully, because every clump of earth might hold something once alive, something lost to time and mud, and when your shovel hits metal you stop. It is the rusted corner of a helmet. You pull it free and find a cracked gas mask beneath it. Its lens is fogged with dirt, and you pause just a moment out of respect, then bury it again deeper this time, as if you could put the war back into the ground. Later still, the rumble comes again, louder now, and the trench shakes. Dust and soil fall from the timber beams overhead, and you feel it before you hear it, the scream of the shell as it comes down like thunder and explodes somewhere behind you. Not close, not yet, but close enough for your heart to pound and the earth to tremble. Someone yells down the line, a name or a warning you cannot tell, and then another shell falls, this one closer, and everyone drops low, hugging the dirt as if it could shield them from iron and fire, and the noise is deafening ears, ringing lungs, tightening eyes, stinging from the smoke and the sharp smell of powder. Then silence again, the dreadful pause between salvos when you do not know if it is over or just beginning. After the barrage, the medics move quickly, silent ghosts in the mud. Their red crosses dulled with grime, they carry stretchers, crawl into dugouts, call out names, and sometimes no one answers. You help lift a man out of the trench, his leg twisted beneath him, his face pale and teeth clenched. He does not scream, just stares up at the sky as if hoping to see something else, something kinder. You do not speak, you only carry him to the station at the rear where tents flap in the wind and morphine is passed like candy. You return to your position, your boots heavier, now your hands shaking, you think of nothing, you simply wait. Hours pass and now it is afternoon, the sun somewhere high above the clouds, invisible and useless. The trench is quieter now, though the tension remains. You sit in the fire bay, your rifle across your lap, your helmet tilted back slightly, just enough to feel the faint breeze that sometimes finds its way into the trench. You breathe slowly, deeply, letting the rhythm soothe you, and you watch a rat crawl along the trench wall, dragging a piece of biscuit bigger than its head. You feel no disgust, just envy at its determination. The rat knows what it must do, and it does it. Later a letter is read aloud, passed down the line from a boy whose brother is fighting in another unit. He says the war will end by Christmas. He says they will all be home soon. He says mother sends jam and warm socks, and everyone smiles a little at that. Even if they do not believe it, the letter is folded and tucked away, a treasure in this world of rot and smoke, and someone begins to hum a hymn soft and low, and others join in, not to sing, but to feel something familiar, something true, and for a moment the trench is not a place of death, but of memory. By evening the light begins to fade again, and the trench is bathed in gloom. The watch is changed. New sentries take their posts and others try to rest. Curling up in dugouts, their bodies sore, their uniforms damp, a man nearby is talking in his sleep, whispering a name over and over. You turn away not out of coldness, but because it is easier that way. Your own dreams come quickly filled with strange colours and muffled sounds, and sometimes laughter that echoes from a place you cannot name. And then it is night again. The stars hidden behind clouds, the trench lit by the dull orange glow of distant fires, and the flicker of lamps behind canvas flaps, and the wind picks up, carrying with it the scent of rain and gunpowder and wet wood. And you lie back against the wall, your eyes half closed, your heart beating slow and steady, and though the trench is full of sounds, boots and voices and the never-ending drip, drip of water, you begin to drift away into sleep, because sleep is the only escape, the only relief, the only way to survive another day. And as your breathing slows and your thoughts blur, you hear one last sound before sleep takes you, the quiet rustle of leaves, not here but imagined, as if you're lying beneath trees, not timbers under stars, not smoke, and the earth holds you not to bury you but to cradle you gently as a mother would. Let your body rest. Now let your mind settle, let the mud fall away, let the rats and lice and guns fade into memory for now, and just sleep. When morning comes again, though you have barely slept and the sky offers no real light, only a murky grey that blends into the walls of the trench, and your body aches in all the familiar places, your back, your knees, your hands, you sit up slowly, brushing off crumbs of earth that fell from the sagging timbers above, and reach for your helmet. Still slick with the wetness of last night's rain, the water never truly leaves it. Pools along the duckboards, it drips from the canvas, it hangs in the air like a weight you cannot shake, and already someone is shouting down the line, orders, perhaps, or a warning, or just their own name lost in the fog. You rise with the others to begin again the same routine that now exists beyond thought, a series of motions as embedded in your muscles as breath. You check your rifle, you wipe your face with a rag, you stretch until your spine cracks, and you listen, not to the sound of birds but to the groan of shifting mud, the creak of warped wood, the faint hum of a world constantly on edge. Someone further down the trench has managed to scrounge together a small pot of tea brewed over a smouldering piece of coal in a tin can, blackened from countless mornings, and they offer it without a word to the next man in line, who takes a grateful sip, then passes it on steam, rising in small, curling tendrils that disappear into the mist like forgotten hopes, and for a moment the bitterness on your tongue is enough to remind you that you are still here, still breathing, still tethered to the living. The smell of the tea mingles with the ever-present odours of damp wool oil, rotting wood, and the faint sourness that comes from bodies too long unwashed, and the tea tastes like comfort, even if only for a second. By midday, the quiet is broken by the roar of engines somewhere behind the lines, trucks moving supplies or ambulances coming and going, and then the rhythmic thud of mortars begins a kind of deadly percussion that starts slow and builds until the ground trembles beneath your feet and the men go still, each one straining to judge whether this barrage is meant for them or for someone farther down the sector. And then a whistle sounds shrill and sharp, and there is movement, a flurry of boots and bodies, the word going down the line like fire in dry grass. Up and over, they say, up and over, and you know what that means. It is time again to climb the ladder, to face no man's land, to run toward a line that may or may not still be held by the enemy, to try to take a trench, to try to survive. You hoist yourself up your legs, screaming against the strain, and suddenly the trench is behind you and you are in the open, the sky wide and grey above the ground, a hellscape below. Barbed wire stretches in tangled knots ahead like black veins through the mud. Craters yawn wide, some filled with water, others with worse, and the air is full of sound gunfire, the screech of shells, the ragged breath of the men around you as you all push forward, one boot after another, your heart pounding, your vision tunnelling in, and then something explodes to your left and a man goes down, and you do not stop because you cannot stop, and already the dirt is spraying again from another burst behind you, and there are shouts and screams, and your ears ring, and your teeth rattle, and your mind is blank with fear and purpose. When you reach the edge of the enemy trench, or what's left of it, you leap down, bayonet ready, eyes wide, and already you are surrounded by the chaos of close combat, the stink of blood and sweat and mud, the shouts of commands and prayers and curses. A man lunges at you and you parry and shove him back, and everything is fast and slow all at once, as if time is melting and reforming around each heartbeat, and then it is over. Or at least the worst of it is, and you stand panting in the remains of the position, surrounded by men who look just as dazed as you. And the ground here is soaked not just from rain, but from everything the earth could not refuse. Later you are back in your own trench somehow, though you do not remember walking there. Your hands are shaking and your uniform is torn, and someone presses a canteen into your grip and you drink greedily, only realising after that the water tastes of metal and rust, and then the medics arrive again, dragging the wounded from the line, their voices calm and firm as they work with whatever supplies are left. And you hear someone laughing, not joyfully, but the laugh of a man who no longer knows what else to do, and the sound makes you want to scream, or sleep, or vanish. You take a moment and sit alone your back against the trench wall, your breath slowing, and you look up at the narrow strip of sky that dares to show itself above the sandbags, and you think of home. Though home is more a dream now than a memory. Your house, your street, the smell of bread in the morning, your mother's hands folding, laundry, the way the sunlight used to fall across the kitchen floor. These things feel like they belong to another life. A life that ended when the war began, and you know you are not alone in feeling this. All the men here carry ghosts, even the ones still living, and sometimes you wonder which of you are more real, the ones walking or the ones remembered. Evening creeps in again slowly, steadily, as it always does, and the trench becomes a tunnel of shadows, shapes, flickering in lantern light. Voices hush the crackling of paper as someone writes by candlelight, the scratching of pen against envelope, the quiet murmur of prayer or poetry or the names of those long gone, and the cold deepens, creeping into your fingers, your feet, your spine, and you wrap your coat tighter and listen to the distant sound of a harmonica played by someone 2 dugouts down the tune. Simple and soft, a lullaby meant for children, but somehow just as fitting for soldiers in the dark. And when night fully falls, you lie down in your dugout, your legs pulled up against your chest, trying to stay warm, trying to ignore the lice, the rats, the smell of mould and oil and unwashed wool, and you close your eyes knowing that morning will come too soon, that stand to will ring out again, that there will be more digging, more waiting, more running, more dying. And yet in this moment there is only breath and stillness and the soft rustling of the trench as the world holds its breath. And for now you are allowed to sleep, allowed to rest, to slip into dreams that smell not of gunpowder, but of lavender and bread and spring. So let yourself go now, let your breathing fall into rhythm with the wind, let your body grow heavier, your thoughts softer, let the trench fade away, let the sounds of war become nothing but echoes across a wide field, where no shells fall and no rifles fire. Let yourself drift into the quiet where the ground is dry and the sky is clear, and there is no fear, only peace and breath and rest. The darkness stretches long into the early hours when the trench becomes not just a place but a mood, a sensation, a weight in your chest, and the distant thump of a shell landing, somewhere too far to matter anymore, becomes the only heartbeat you hear, aside from your own, and your eyes flutter open now and then, checking nothing in particular, only sensing time slipping past like water between your fingers, and each minute feels both eternal and gone. In an instant you hear someone snoring close by, a low rhythmic sound that seems almost musical in contrast to the groaning boards beneath you, and now and then the quiet clip of boots moving slowly past as sentries make their rounds, their shoulders hunched against the chill, their eyes darting toward the sky and the line, and the shadows that never stop shifting in the corners of vision, and as you lie there, your body aching, your ears straining for movement, your thoughts drift to the last time you touched grass. Dry, clean, honest grass, not like this slick crawling mess around your boots, but real blades rising upright under sun and wind, and maybe even the distant call of a bird overhead. Something not trying to survive, something simply living. And your heart twists because you realise how long it's been since anything felt alive. Here in the world you now inhabit, everything is a half version of itself. The sky is not blue, the food is not warm, the water is not clear, the ground is not solid, the air is not silent, and even your own thoughts seem filtered through the damp cloth of exhaustion. When morning edges in again, the sky lightens, but the world does not brighten. The colour remains dull and smeared, and your bones feel older than they should. As you rise and shake the stiffness from your arms, your breath fogs out before you and your fingers fumble over the buttons of your jacket, which has not been dry in weeks if ever. And already someone is coughing, the long rasping kind that never quite ends, and someone else is asking where the bread went, and the answer is no one knows, because the supply train hasn't made it through in 3 days, or maybe 4. It's hard to tell, because out here days are counted by how many of your comrades remain in the trench, not by what the calendar says. And while you chew on something hard and tasteless from your pocket, you catch sight of a man across from you, shaving with a cracked mirror and a dull blade, and you wonder why he bothers, but then realise it's not for beauty or comfort, it's to remember what it feels like to care about something small and normal, and that thought humbles you. So you nod when he glances up and he nods back, and the two of you say nothing, because in this place small gestures mean more than words. By midday a new order arrives, another patrol, this one across no man's land, to scout the enemy's wire and count their sentries, and no one volunteers, but everyone is chosen, and when it's your name they call you Nod as if you had expected it all along, and you prepare quietly, loading your rifle, adjusting your kit, tying your scarf tighter, though it does little against the wind. And as you climb out under the low cover of creeping mist, the world seems to hold its breath for you. The ground is slick and uneven, pocked with craters and bones and remnants of those who came before, and the sky above is watching you. Though you wish it would look away, and your heart thuds once, twice again, and you move low and slow, careful of every step, listening for the click of a tripwire, the rustle of movement, the telltale cough of a German sentry. And you whisper to the others, 2 men moving beside you, shapes in the gloom, and none of you speak beyond hand signs, because language feels too loud, too hopeful out here. And after what feels like hours, you reach the shattered husk of what was once a listening post. The wood splintered, the canvas shredded, and the body of someone sprawled across a beam, uniform, unfamiliar face buried in the mud. And you take what notes you can, mark the positions, sketch the layout, and then pull back slow and quiet. All nerves and silence, until finally the trench reclaims you like a mouth closing. And only then do you exhale fully and sit down, your legs suddenly trembling, your hands numb, and someone slaps your shoulder once firmly, and it is more grounding than any blanket or cup of tea. Later that afternoon the rain returns, not in sheets, but in a steady, unrelenting drizzle that soaks into every seam and pore, and you watch it roll down the walls of the trench, forming rivulets that carry scraps of paper dirt, scraps of food, and sometimes things better left unnamed. And it is during this lull that the chaplain arrives again, walking through the trench with a small book clutched tight in his hands, his voice calm and tired as he speaks, not loudly, but just enough for those near to hear words that mean different things to different people to some. It is comfort to others, a ritual to still others, It is simply a reminder that someone remembers their names beyond this place, and you listen not for faith but for rhythm, for the rise and fall of something that sounds like peace, and your eyes close as he recites a psalm and the wind picks up just slightly whispering through torn canvas and barbed wire. And for a moment the trench feels almost like a church, hushed, reverent, alive with memory. Then the call comes for working party again. Sandbags need refilling. The latrine has flooded again. A parapet has sagged from the constant weight of water and men and fire. And so you move with the others, shoulder to shoulder, shovels in hand, eyes down as you dig and lift and fill and drag, and the repetition becomes its own kind of prayer. Your mind drifting on the motion, the rhythm of shoveling, the slap of mud into sacks, the grunt of lifting, and somewhere behind you someone starts singing an old tune from before the war. Something about rivers and summer, and the chorus rises in pieces across the line, uneven but heartfelt, and you feel your throat tighten, not from smoke or cold, but from the sudden rush of something warm, something close to belonging. When night falls again, it does so without ceremony. The light fades and the trench swallows it whole, and the cold returns deeper than before, creeping into your chest, into your breath, until every exhale feels like glass, and the lanterns are lit one by one, their small flames fluttering against the damp. The men gather where they can around tin cups and fading letters, around matches that won't strike and boots that won't dry, and someone nearby is telling a story, a simple one about fishing in a river back home, and you do not know the place, but you listen anyway, because the way he speaks makes you see it clearly. A boy with rolled-up trousers, a string tied to a stick, the ripple of clean water, the sound of birds, and his voice breaks once, but he keeps going. And when he finishes, no one says a word, but the silence that follows is filled with a kind of sacredness. And for a few heartbeats, no one is a soldier, and nothing smells like death, and there is only the crackle of a match finally catching and the soft exhale of flame. Then the sentries change again, and the dugouts are filled once more with men, curling into coats with hands tucked under arms, and you lie back watching the sky sea, between boards and beams, hoping for stars but seeing only fog, and you let your eyes close, your body heavy, your limbs sinking into the straw and dirt and blankets that barely warm, and you let your mind drift beyond the wire, beyond the trench, beyond the war, to a quiet field somewhere far away where the wind is soft and the sun is warm, and the only sound is the hush of trees and the sigh of your own breathing. And you tell yourself you will dream of that place tonight and not of craters or cries or flame. So now let go, let your body ease into stillness. Let your thoughts wander like smoke through the branches of old forgotten woods. Let the war fall silent. Let the trench disappear. Let your breath become slow and full and steady like waves on a distant shore. And know that for now you are safe. Held in this moment of quiet and care and sleep will find you like a friend with gentle hands and a kind smile. And you may follow it without fear into the darkness that holds no pain. Only rest, only peace, only sleep. There is a moment in the trench just before dawn when the silence feels almost like kindness, a space that presses against your skin like a woolen blanket, not warm but familiar, the kind of silence that carries the weight of breath and waiting. And when you sit up slowly, shaking loose the dream of a green hill, and your mother's voice calling you for supper, you blink into that pale half-light and realise the dream is gone again, replaced by wet socks and sagging shoulders and the heavy smell of men and mould and gun oil. And as you reach for your helmet, your fingers brush a beetle crawling across the collar of your coat, and you flick it away gently, not because you mind its presence, but because it reminds you of lice and their constant crawling and chewing and the way they nest in seams and folds. And the chap next to you scratches at his chest with a sigh of frustration, mumbling something about burning all his clothes when the war ends, and you nod as though that ending is a place you'll both visit someday. A stop on a distant train line, not just an imagined shore, and you wonder if men ever come back from this. Not in body, but in memory, because here time doesn't just pass, it loops, it circles, it drags and devours, and the sun when it rises doesn't bring clarity. It only reveals more of the same, more wood, more muck, more wire, more faces smeared in grey, more bandages, more stares that forget how to blink. You're sent on water detail, not glamorous but necessary, and the buckets are heavy even before they're filled, and the pump is half a mile down a sloping trail that stinks of latrines and rot, and you and 3 others make your way down in silence except for the squelch of boots and the occasional muttered curse when someone stumbles on a rock or a corpse, and you try not to look at the shapes half buried in earth, sometimes missing parts, sometimes still clutching letters or photographs or crucifixes. And you feel the ache rising in your chest, not grief, not quite, more like the exhaustion of pretending you can still be shocked. And at the pump the line is long, men from other sections waiting with tin cans and dented kettles, and someone tells a joke that would have made you laugh once, but now you only smile politely, because you don't have the strength to join the chorus, and when your turn comes, the handle groans and shudders as it brings up water, cloudy and tasting faintly of rust, and you wonder again if it's safe. But you drink it anyway, because thirst has a way of silencing doubt, and you shoulder the heavy, sloshing weight and begin the slow walk back through the mud and flies and silence. The afternoon brings word of movement along the enemy's flank, and the officers bark orders that crack like whips through the trench, and suddenly men are running, lifting rifles, checking ammunition, stacking crates, dragging up extra rations and bandages, and the runner dashes past again and again, breathless with up-to-dates, and the sergeant who hasn't shaved in 3 days is shouting over the din about being ready and steady, and don't shoot until they see the whites of their eyes, and someone mutters bitterly that by the time we see their eyes we're already dead, and no one laughs because it's not funny, it's just true, and you find yourself sitting in a corner pressing bullets into your magazine slowly, methodically, each one sliding in with a click that feels like a verdict, and your hands move almost without thought because they've done this hundreds of times and your mind is elsewhere, walking streets you haven't seen in months, smelling coffee and pastry from that little shop on the corner, hearing the clatter of plates in your mother's kitchen and the creak of the old gate you meant to fix, and then someone is tapping your shoulder, it's time, and you move. You line up at the fire step, the barrel of your rifle resting on the sandbag, the sky above grey and indifferent, the air humming with tension, the wire ahead glinting like jagged teeth, and you hear the whistle rise. Not once, but 3 blasts, shrill and final, and men surge upward over the edge, screaming, roaring, praying, some with eyes wide, some already weeping, and you climb too, feet slipping on the boards, legs pumping, heart hammering, rifle clenched like a lifeline, and you run forward through the broken world of blasted trees and smoking craters and twisted limbs, and the air is a storm of noise and colour and motion, bullets tearing through the space around you, shells splitting the earth into pieces, and you can't hear your own voice, though. You're shouting something, maybe your name, maybe someone else's, maybe nothing at all, and then you're down in a shell hole, your breath ragged, and your knee bleeding. And beside you a man clutches at his throat where no sound comes out. Only blood, and his eyes are wide, 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 and then glassy, and you close them with shaking fingers and push up again and run. You don't remember the rest, only that you made it back hours later, covered in filth and bruises, limping, dragging a comrade whose name you still don't know, and the trench took you back like it always does, like a grave welcoming. Its occupant, and you collapsed and slept right there in the mud, unmoving and unbothered. And when you woke it was dark again, and someone had placed a coat over your shoulders, not yours, but warm, and for that small mercy you whispered a thank you, to no one in particular. The days that follow blur together, days of rain and repairs and patrols and hunger, of coughing and rats and strange moments of laughter that feel almost sinful, because how can you laugh while others lie still not far from where you sit? And yet laughter comes strange and hollow and sharp and necessary like breath. And sometimes you talk with the man next to you about what you'll do after the war. Not if, but after, because to say if is to give the darkness power. And you speak of farms and schools and train rides and of building things again, of teaching children to plant flowers instead of throw grenades, and you both nod and sip thin tea and avoid each other's eyes, because you both know that saying it doesn't make it true. There's one evening when a ceasefire holds longer than expected, and someone plays a harmonica soft and slow, and the notes float through the trench like the scent of bread or the warmth of a fire. Something too lovely for this place, and men gather quietly, listening, not speaking, eyes closed, heads bowed. And when the song ends and no one claps, they only sit a little straighter and breathe a little deeper. And for a moment the trench feels less like a tomb and more like a home, a broken home perhaps, but still a place where men live, not just wait to die. And then it rains again harder. This time, the kind of rain that drowns rats and turns floors to soup and sends men scrambling to build up walls that sag and shudder under the weight, and you find yourself ankle-deep shoveling mud with hands that can no longer feel, and you laugh quietly. Not because it's funny, but because it's insane, this place, this war, this endless wet, and someone near you joins in, and the two of you laugh until tears blur your vision, and your shoulders shake, and it doesn't stop until you're too tired to move, and only then do you realise you've been crying. Not laughing, after all. and the man beside you places a hand on your back, and you don't shrug it off, because sometimes the only thing that keeps you upright is another hand, another body, another soul that's still here, still trying, still breathing. And as night falls again, the lanterns flicker one by one, and the trench grows quiet, not peaceful but tired, and men curl into dugouts and holes and corners wrapped in blankets and coats, and each carries his own memories, his own ghosts, his own reasons for staying alive, and you lie back again watching the sky, where no stars appear, and you close your eyes and picture the sea calm and wide and endless, and you imagine yourself walking barefoot on warm sand, the air full of salt and wind and sun, and the cry of gulls overhead. And you hold that vision close and breathe deep and slow, letting the image cradle you, letting it pull you gently away from the damp, the fear, the sorrow, until all that remains is the sound of your own breath and the steady, quiet rhythm of your heart, a soft reminder that you are still here, still dreaming, still human. The winter night has turned bitter and sharp, carrying with it the moans of the broken wood and the distant low thunder of artillery. And as you sit with your back against the trench wall, your coat wrapped tightly around your frame and your breath, a faint mist in the air, you wonder how many more nights will pass like this, how many more shifts, how many more frozen mornings, and your fingers are raw from the cold and the damp has settled into your joints like a permanent guest, and you feel it in your knees, in your shoulders, in the way you move slower now, more deliberate, every movement weighed down, not just by fatigue, but by something deeper, something heavy and unseen and beside you. Private Larkin fiddles with a broken tin, trying to make a makeshift stove from it, muttering curses under his breath until finally he gets the flame to catch, and you both lean in, hoping for a little warmth, letting your hands hover over the tiny flicker of life as if it could burn away all that clings to you. And the warmth is faint but real, and you let it pull your thoughts from the trench, from the cold, from the weight of the rifle across your lap, and instead imagine for just a moment that you're somewhere else, anywhere else, perhaps a campsite in the woods, or a firelit cabin in the hills, and the wind you hear is not filled with death but with falling leaves, and the smell is not of rot and mildew, but of pine and smoke, and in this quiet moment, this fragile illusion, you almost smile. There's talk in the trench about a rotation soon, maybe a few days at the rear lines, maybe even a chance to sleep on dry straw and drink something warm and sweet, and the rumour moves like a bird from mouth to mouth, lighting up faces and straightening backs, and though no one says it aloud, everyone dares to hope just a little, and hope is dangerous here. It can crack open your chest and make you soft, it can blind you to the truth that things rarely change, that the mud and the noise and the grief always return. And yet still you find yourself staring at the horizon, wondering if the sky will be brighter in the morning, if maybe, just maybe, the officer's voice will call your name for the transport, and you imagine the feel of a blanket across your shoulders, the taste of meat that hasn't come from a can, and a sleep so deep and dreamless it feels like rebirth. And while you wait, you write a letter, not because you have much to say, but because writing feels like reaching out, like throwing a thread across the darkness, hoping it catches somewhere, and you tell your sister about the stars. Though you haven't seen them in weeks, and about the men, though you leave out the worst of it, and about how you miss the sound of rain on a proper roof and the way bread smells straight from the oven. And when you sign your name, your hand trembles a little, and you tell yourself it's just the cold. Later that evening, the trench is shelled again, not heavily, but enough to shake the walls and send a few more timbers crashing down, and you curl into yourself, bracing for the sound, the blast, the dust, the silence that follows. And when it comes, you keep your eyes closed, waiting for the ceiling to settle, for the world to stop spinning. And when it does, you rise slowly, brushing dirt from your coat and checking that your rifle is still beside you and your pack still dry and your fingers move automatically. Checking your pockets, your boots, your helmet, because routine is survival. And around you others do the same, some swearing, some laughing, that high brittle laugh that's more fear than humour. And when it's over, when the shouting stops and the sky grows dark again, you all return to your posts like puppets drawn back into position, and someone finds a rat bloated and torn and hurls it over the edge, and another man lights a cigarette with shaking hands, and no one says anything about the boy from C Company, who isn't answering his name, because there's no point in asking where he is. You all know. When dawn comes, it creeps like a thief, grey and silent, and you're tasked with standing watch, eyes fixed on the enemy trench. Barely visible through the fog, and the sound of boots in mud behind you fades as the men fall into restless half-sleep, and the stillness is almost holy, so complete that even the birds dare not sing. And you stare until your vision blurs and your mind begins to wander, and you think about the time before this, before uniforms and orders and rations and wounds, about the street. You grew up on the cracked sidewalk and the way the lamplight used to flicker outside your window about the girl who lived 3 doors down, who used to hum while she walked, and who always smiled at you even when you were too shy to smile back, and you wonder where she is now, whether she remembers you, whether she ever got your letter, and whether she's still walking that street alone. And then a rustle in the distance jolts you back and your fingers tighten on your rifle, but it's just wind and you breathe again slow and steady, and tell yourself not to think too much, not to feel too deeply, because here feelings are like wounds, they fester if left open. In the afternoon the chaplain visits his coat too clean and his boots not yet torn by the mud, and he brings a quiet with him, a gentleness that unsettles more than soothes, and he speaks to the men in low tones, offering prayers and smiles and sometimes a hand on the shoulder, and you let him speak to you too, not because you believe anymore, but because it feels good to hear a voice that doesn't command or curse, and he asks your name and how long you've been here and where you're from, and you answer softly, almost shyly, like a child in school, and he nods and presses a small card into your hand, a prayer printed in gold ink, and you don't read it, but you keep it in your pocket because having something clean, something untouched by the trench feels like protection, like armour made of paper and hope. And he moves on, and the quiet he leaves behind feels heavier than the shells. The week drags with a kind of cruel patience, filled with the usual rituals of survival: eat if there's food, sleep if there's space, dig if there's time. And you measure the days not in hours but in cigarettes and letters and bandage rolls, and each night before sleep you wrap your feet in what dry cloth you can find and hope the rats don't find you too quickly. And each morning you check your toes and stretch your fingers and shake off the stiffness and prepare to do it all again. And sometimes when you wake, you don't remember your own name right away, only your number, only your rank, only the taste of your last meal and the weight of the air, and you whisper your name to yourself like a spell, like a charm against forgetting, because names are important. They remind you who you were before the trench, before the mud, before the long cold march into this nightmare. And still, the war continues, endless and wide and indifferent, and the commanders speak of strategy and fronts and victory and losses, and the maps they use are full of lines and arrows and colours. But they don't show the mud, they don't show the fear or the way men shrink in on themselves, or the way silence clings to the dead and the dying. And you wonder if they remember that the trenches are full of boys and brothers and husbands, not just numbers, and that every hill gained is paid for in memories and futures. And when you hear about the latest offensive about the ridge that must be taken, you know what it means. You know it means more running, more fire, more silence, and you sit with that knowledge in your chest like a stone waiting. And as the sun sets again, behind the ridge, behind the wire, behind the smoke, you let yourself breathe slowly, deeply, fully just once, and you listen to the crackle of the fire. Someone managed to start in a mess tin to the rustle of coats as men turn over in sleep, to the soft humming of a lullaby, from a man too tired to notice he's singing. And you let the sounds wrap around you like blankets, and you close your eyes and imagine again the field you knew as a boy, tall with grass and alive with birds, and you walk through it in your mind, barefoot and smiling and free, and the only sound is the wind and your own breath, and the song of the earth itself, and for a moment you are there, not here, not in the trench, not beneath the weight of war, but there. And you hold that vision gently, letting it rock you like a mother's hand until sleep comes slow and soft and certain. The next morning begins not with sunlight, but with the low rumble of distant guns. A sound so familiar now that it's become the chorus of your existence, and you lie there for a moment not moving, letting the weight of your blanket, your coat, your own exhaustion press you deeper into the earth, as if the trench itself is trying to keep you hidden and safe, and the cold has settled in your bones once more, creeping in silently during the night despite all your layers and makeshift barriers, and you flex your fingers slowly, trying to bring them back to life, and you hear the boots of the runner moving down the duckboards, slapping wetly against the wood, and the word spreads quickly like frost that your company will rotate tonight, and there's a buzzing in your chest. Not quite joy, not quite dread, just a shift in the air that makes your breath catch. And even the sergeant who never smiles seems almost human for a second when he says it's true, and it's then you realise how heavy the days have become, how tightly the trench has wrapped itself around your spirit like a second skin. And now the thought of dry socks and real coffee and maybe a bath makes you almost dizzy with longing. But still there's the whole day ahead, and the trench doesn't care if you're leaving soon. It still demands your attention and your obedience, your silence. So you carry on scraping mud from your gear, wiping down your rifle, making small repairs to things you won't need in a few hours, because the ritual itself keeps you steady, keeps you from thinking too far ahead, and the sun is high now. if you can call that sickly yellow smear. The sun and the sky above is heavy with smoke and whispers, and you take your post again on the fire step, staring across at the enemy lines, where movement is rare and ghosts seem to flicker just behind the horizon, and a sniper's crack rings out somewhere far left, and all heads duck instinctively, and then rise slowly again like wary animals testing the air, and someone mutters something about being lucky, and someone else spits into the mud, and you think about how many bullets have passed through this narrow piece of world, and how many eyes have closed forever here, and you shift your stance and blink against the grit and think of that word again, lucky, and how strange it sounds now, how empty it feels in your mouth, like something you used to believe in but can't quite remember the meaning of anymore. When the rations arrive, they're cold and late and thinner than yesterday, and you eat them without taste, without care, letting the texture fill the hollow in your stomach, and Larkin jokes about what he'll eat first when he gets to the rear. Maybe eggs, maybe steak, maybe just a fresh piece of bread, and you all join in throwing out wild fantasies of feasts and warm beds, and the kind of quiet that doesn't come after an explosion but before sleep, and it's like a game now, this dreaming. And it keeps the cold away for a little while, and when you're done you light what's left of a shared cigarette and let the smoke curl around your head like a spell, like a ward against the filth, and you close your eyes just for a moment, just to feel something different. And when you open them again, the sun has shifted, and the trench looks smaller, somehow more cramped, more temporary, like a place you could really leave, like a place that doesn't own you after all. Then comes the weight that stretches like wire across your nerves, because rotation never comes when it's supposed to, and the hours drag their feet and the stories dry up and the laughter fades, and you find yourself checking your kit again and again, counting bullets, adjusting straps, brushing down your uniform like you're about to see someone important. And maybe in a way you are, because the rear lines have become a kind of sacred myth among the men, a heaven made of dry clothes and hot tea and silence. And there's fear too in the waiting, because you know that the shelling could begin again at any moment, that an order could change everything, that the trench could collapse or flood or catch fire. And so you sit tight, breathing, slow grounding yourself in the familiar details, the roughness of your coat, the weight of your helmet, the rhythm of your breath, and finally as the sky begins to purple with dusk, the call comes soft and serious, and you move like a ghost, gathering your things, not speaking, not rushing, just sliding back into motion, as if you've always known this moment was coming. And the line forms quietly, and the men begin to walk, ducking low, stepping carefully, eyes alert, because even leaving the trench is dangerous. Even leaving can be the last thing you do. The journey to the rear lines is long and winding, through communication trenches so narrow you have to turn sideways at points, and the walls are slick with moss and wet earth, and the duckboards groan beneath your boots, and somewhere ahead someone coughs, and someone behind trips and swears, and you all freeze for a moment listening, hearts racing for the sound of enemy fire, but there is none, and you continue moving one slow step at a time, until finally the trench opens up into a wider track and then a clearing, and then beyond that the glow of lanterns and voices, and the first real breath of air that doesn't stink of rot or blood, and you almost stagger from the sudden difference, and someone behind you laughs, not cruelly, but in amazement, and you realise you're safe, at least for now, and the air is sweeter here, still cold but not cruel, and the mud is not as deep, and the stars are visible even if faint, and you look up and catch your breath, because it's been weeks since you saw anything above you but smoke and wood and the dull grey of death, and the stars seem impossibly far and impossibly kind, and your eyes sting and you don't care. At the billets you're led into a barn already crowded with men, but the straw is clean and dry and the roof doesn't leak, and when you lower yourself into the pile of it, it cradles you like nothing has in months, and you feel your body unclench slowly, inch by inch, like a fist opening, and the warmth of the others near you is a comfort, not a burden. And you hear someone snoring and someone whispering and someone weeping so quietly it could be the wind, and when the hot tea comes, it's too strong and too bitter and perfect, and you drink it in greedy sips, letting it fill the hollow places inside you, and they bring bread and a thin soup, and it's better than anything you've eaten in weeks, and someone tells a joke about lice, and someone else starts humming, and the world seems small and simple and survivable for the first time in so long. You sleep that night without dreams, or at least if you dream you don't remember, and when you wake it's because of the light, not the shelling, and that alone feels like a miracle, and your body aches, but not from fear, and you stretch and sit up and breathe deep, and for a while you just sit there in the soft quiet, watching the dust rise in the sunbeams and thinking about nothing and everything. And one of the officers comes in and tells you there's mail, and you stumble out into the crisp morning light and line up like schoolboys, and when your name is called and a letter is placed in your hand, you hold it like it might disappear, and it smells faintly of something warm and clean, and when you open it your sister's handwriting spills out, And you read about the garden blooming again and your mother's new shawl and the neighbour's boy, who still asks where you've gone. And it's all so ordinary, so impossibly far from where you are, that for a moment you feel like an imposter. Like maybe you died in the trench and this is a dream stitched together by some part of you desperate to remember what peace felt like. The next few days pass in a haze of food and rest and small tasks, mending uniforms, cleaning rifles, writing letters, and though the war is still near, though the guns still growl on the horizon, it feels like you've stepped out of time, like the trench was a fever. And this is the cool cloth on your brow, and the fear hasn't vanished, but it's dulled and softened, and you let yourself smile sometimes, you let yourself hope, and the others do too, their voices lighter, their steps quicker, and there's a shared understanding among you all that this is borrowed time and it must be cherished, not just endured, and someone finds a harmonica and plays a tune that reminds you of the summer fairs, and someone else tries to dance and nearly falls, and everyone laughs, and no one mentions that in a few days you'll go back, no one dares. Because going back means facing it all again, the mud, the rats, the waiting, the death that lingers like smoke around your collar, and no matter how clean you get, no matter how rested you feel, the trench waits and it remembers and it changes you. And some part of you already mourns for the man you'll be when you return, because you know he won't be the same, won't be as open or as light, won't hear music the same or see stars without remembering the sound of distant guns, and yet you will go back because that's what you do, because it's your place and your duty, and because those still there need you just as you needed those who came before you. And as the night draws in and you lie back in the straw again, staring up at the wooden beams and the flickering lamplight, you let yourself imagine just one more time that you never went to war at all, that you're just a traveller passing through a sleepy village, that the noise outside is nothing more than carts and horses, and that in the morning you'll rise and wash your face and walk into town for bread and milk, and along the way the birds will sing, and the sun will rise golden and kind, and when you reach the baker's he'll smile and ask about your family, and the girl who lives down the lane, and your pockets will be full of nothing but change and crumbs and peace. The days of rest slip through your fingers like river water, and before long the whispers return in the early hours, passed between offices and corners, and through nods instead of words, and you recognise the rhythm of it, the choreography of orders and glances, and the way boots begin to gather mud again, and the way men begin to check their rifles with more purpose and less idle thought, and you feel it settle into your chest like a chill before the storm, and you know the return is near, and you pack your kit slowly, your fingers automatic, as if they too remember the weight of the trench, before your mind fully allows the reality to form again. And when the command comes at dusk, your heart doesn't race, it sinks, and you stand with the others forming ranks, as if your body knows how to fall in line even when your soul wants to hide, and you begin the march back under a sky smeared with smoke and stars too dim to guide anyone home, and your boots crunch on dried leaves and broken twigs. And now the night is no longer soft but sharp with tension, and the air carries the echo of distant shellfire like thunder behind a hill, and as you draw closer the scent returns, first faint then strong, a mixture of mud, damp rot, old metal and something else unspoken. And you pass the silent outlines of other units, some returning, some waiting, their eyes hollow, their uniforms stained with the work of survival, and no one speaks, not properly, not loudly, only soft mutters and shuffles as if words themselves are too heavy to carry back in. By the time you reach the line again, the moon is high and the trench yawns open before you, like the mouth of some ancient beast waiting to swallow you once more, and stepping down into it feels like re-entering a dream you tried to forget, one where the walls press close and the darkness breathes against your neck, and already your body remembers where to step, where to duck, where not to place your foot, because the boards have given way, and you pass the same bullet-scarred sandbags, the same twisted wire, the same names carved into wooden walls like old prayers and curses, and someone has scrawled a date above the dugout with mud or blood, you can't tell, and it's too fresh to ignore, and you wonder if the man who wrote it still walks or lies beneath some distant field. And you take your position again in the familiar shallow recess where your boots barely avoid the worst of the muck, and you let your gear slide from your back and lean against the timber wall that holds more stories than any book, and just like that you're home again. If home is a place where the earth trembles and the sky falls and your breath is never quite full and the rats greet you like old friends, that night is quiet in the way that only war can be quiet, where silence is not peace but pause, and you rest with your rifle across your knees, your head tipped forward but never fully relaxed, because even sleep here is a transaction. And when morning comes, the grey light reveals how little the trench has changed and how much you have, and breakfast is cold and barely palatable. And no one complains, because complaints are like wind here, always moving, never landing, and then come the hours of watching and waiting, and standing guard and checking equipment, and listening to the familiar drip of water from the ceiling of the dugout, and scraping mud from your sleeves and boots and from the food tins before you risk using them. And the rats are worse. Now, bolder, hungrier, larger, and they dart between shadows and climb over boots, and one even gnaws at a man's blanket while he's inside it. And no one bats an eye because some part of all of you has accepted them as cohabitants, as part of the natural order of this unnatural world. In the days that follow, the shelling resumes, not constant, not overwhelming, just enough to remind you it's there. Enough to rattle the beams, enough to make the ground shiver, enough and to make your ears ring in the quiet that comes after. And it becomes part of the rhythm now, the distant boom, the pause, the inward breath, the checking of limbs and walls, and the small bitter laugh of relief, and the whispered names of those in neighbouring trenches when something hits too close, and the messengers run with their notes held tight like lifelines, and their faces streaked with fear and mud, and when the rain comes it doesn't fall, it pours, it assaults the trench, turning everything to slush, to soup, to a heavy sucking weight that pulls at your ankles and drags your steps, and the duckboards begin to float in places, and you have to hold on to the wall to keep from falling, and the rain fills every tin, every pocket, every opening, and your skin is never dry, and your hands begin to crack and swell and bleed in places you can't reach, and the smell of mildew and decay becomes part of you, and yet still you carry on, still you watch, still you wait. One morning after a particularly violent barrage, the call goes up for stretcher bearers, and you volunteer not because you're brave, but because it's movement and purpose and something outside your head, and you follow. The corporal down a winding sap through mud up to your thighs, past the moans and whimpers, and when you reach the crater that used to be a dugout, you find the man half buried, his leg crushed under timber, and you dig with your hands because the tools won't reach, and he's screaming and then not screaming, and that silence is worse. And when you lift him finally onto the stretcher, his weight is astonishing, and his blood soaks into your sleeves, and the way back is longer, steeper, harder, and you don't speak, only grunt and strain with the weight. And when you pass others, they don't look at you, they don't nod, they just make way silently, respectfully. And by the time you get him to the aid post, he's already cold, and no one says it out loud, but everyone knows, and the medic just nods, and you return to your trench empty-handed and heavier than when you left. You don't sleep that night, not really, and you lie with your eyes open, watching the flicker of a distant flare rise and fall, and the colour it casts is not white, but some sickly blue that makes the mud look like flesh, and you think about home, not in specifics, not in rooms or faces, just in the sensation of warmth and stillness, and the absence of rot, and you remember the weight of a blanket that wasn't wet, and the sound of a clock ticking in a dry room, and you try to hold on to that feeling like a match in the dark, and you don't realise you've dozed off until a hand on your shoulder brings you back, and it's your turn again, and the routine begins once more. One day you wake to find the man beside you missing, and when you ask they tell you he didn't wake up and that he's already been taken back behind the line for burial, and no one speaks more than that, because there's nothing more to say, and someone takes his spot and his gear, and it's as if he was never there, and his name fades fast like fog, and you realise that could be you, and it will be someday, and that this place doesn't remember you and doesn't need to, and it will continue long after you're gone, with new faces, new names, same mud, same fear. As the weather warms slightly, the mud becomes thicker, stickier, clings to everything, and the flies return buzzing, thick around the latrines and the food and the open wounds and the dead who haven't yet been cleared, and you try not to gag as you eat your stew, and you swat them away from your face, but they return again and again like memories, and the air becomes heavy with rot and iron and wetness, and every breath tastes like metal and loss, and the rats now fight openly over scraps in broad daylight. And you watch them with the same dull gaze you use for everything here. Occasionally there are moments that pierce the fog, small ones, a bird landing on the edge of the trench, just long enough to remind you of something gentler, or a letter from a sister with a dried flower pressed inside, or the sound of someone humming a lullaby their mother used to sing. And for a brief second you feel human again, not just a shadow in a ditch, not just a number. And those moments are rare and precious, and you hoard them inside your chest like flame in a storm. And sometimes at night you dream of the trench not as it is, but as something vast and endless, like a maze or a throat or the inside of the world, and you walk through it forever, passing doors that never open, and hearing voices you almost recognise, and sometimes you wake with a jolt, heart racing only to find you never moved, never left. And the dream was just another room inside this one. And you close your eyes and pray not to dream again, and when you do, it's only mud, only water, only the taste of rust and the sound of boots too close and breath too loud. You lose track of time altogether. Now days marked only by the arrival of rations, or the changing of the guard, or the odd respite from shelling, and time becomes a loop, not a line, and you stop thinking of the future beyond the next meal, the next dry sock, the next letter, and everything else falls away. Even your own name feels strange sometimes when said aloud, like it belongs to someone else, someone cleaner and freer and whole, and you keep a small tin in your coat pocket, one with a picture inside faded and worn, and you take it out sometimes and stare at it. Not because you miss them, but because it helps you remember that you existed before this, that this is not all you are. And in the quietest hours, when even the rats are still and the trench is hushed in that eerie pre-dawn gloom, you sometimes wonder what it's all for and whether you'll make it out, and whether you even want to. And then a breeze stirs through the trench, gentle as breath, and the stars blink above. And for a moment you imagine you're somewhere else, somewhere dry and soft and safe, and you close your eyes and hold that image like a lifeline, and you breathe in and out and wait for the morning to come again. The dawn breaks again with a pale light that struggles through heavy clouds, and you awaken to the scent of wet earth and cold metal, and the soft patter of rain on canvas and wood, and you feel the chill deep in your bones as you pull your coat tighter around you and prepare for another day in the endless trench, and as you stand and move, your joints crack and ache from the damp and cold that never leaves, and you notice the men around you, their faces drawn and pale, their eyes heavy but watchful, and the silence between them is thick with unspoken stories, and you take a slow breath and try to fill your lungs with the damp morning air and imagine it as fresh as a forest after rain, even as the sounds of distant gunfire echo softly like a reminder of the world you never left, and the mud clings stubbornly to your boots and pants, and you think about how it has become part of you like a second skin, like the weight of your back or the scar on your hand from shrapnel last winter. And you find yourself drifting back to the night before when a flare lit the sky, and the trench became a gallery of shadows, and you remember the feeling of standing there, holding your rifle and watching the silhouettes of your comrades moving silently, and the way the world seemed suspended for a breath, caught between terror and resolve, and the flare faded, and the dark returned. But the feeling stayed with you like a pulse in your veins, and you try to hold on to that pulse as the day stretches ahead, and you move through the trench, checking the boards that line the bottom, keeping you from sinking into the muck, and you help a younger soldier adjust his helmet, noticing the nervous tremble in his hands, and you nod at him quietly, because sometimes words are too loud here. And then you reach the dugout where the cook is preparing a thin stew over a small fire, and the smell is weak but enough to remind you of warmth and home, and you sit for a moment on a crate trying to savour it. But the noises outside pull you back to attention, and you glance toward the parapet where the lookout stands still as a statue, scanning the barren no-man's land beyond. And you hear the distant rumble of artillery and the sharp crack of rifle fire, and your heart tightens, but your face remains calm because you have learned to wear fear like a uniform, and you think of the letters you've received from home tucked safely in your pocket, worn soft from being handled so often, and you imagine the faces of those who wrote them, their voices faint but comforting like a lullaby, and for a fleeting moment you are elsewhere in a garden, with sunlight warming your skin and the scent of flowers in the breeze, and then a rat scurries past your foot reminding you of the trench and its relentless grip, and you rise and continue your rounds, stepping carefully over broken timber and discarded shells, and you see the scars etched into the walls where bullets have struck, and you touch one gently as if to memorize its cold, jagged edge, and you think of the men who took those shots and the ones who never came back, and the names carved in the wood seem like whispers from ghosts who still linger, and you wonder if they too felt this endless waiting and the creeping numbness that follows days of fear and monotony, and you stop for a moment to lean against the trench wall, feeling the rough wood beneath your palm, and you close your eyes and listen to the sounds of the trench, the soft drip of water from a leak above the dull murmur of voices, distant and near, the scratching of rats behind the sandbags and the rustling of your own clothes, and you breathe deeply and try to anchor yourself in this small moment of calm before the storm that is always coming, and you remind yourself that this place is temporary, even if it feels eternal, and that the mud will dry someday, and the guns will fall silent, and you will walk again on grass that doesn't stick to your boots, and you move forward with slow, steady steps, and then the orders come to prepare for a patrol, and you gather your gear, checking your rifle and ammunition, and the weight of it feels both familiar and strange after so many days, and you exchange brief nods with your comrade Azia, sharing a quiet understanding and fear that no words can capture, and you crawl out onto the fire step and peer over the parapet into the grey dawn and the expanse of shattered earth and twisted wire. That is no man's land, and the air is cold and sharp and carries a faint scent of smoke and something else you can't place, and you take a deep breath and steady your nerves, knowing that once you step beyond the trench you leave some part of yourself behind, and you move out silently with the others, your boots muffled by soft earth, and the patrol spread out ahead and beside you, and every shadow and crack in the ground seems alive with danger. And you remind yourself to keep your eyes open to the smallest movement, to the faintest sound, to the way the wind shifts, because it may mean the difference between life and death. And the minutes stretch long and heavy as you move carefully through the wasteland, and you see the remnants of lives torn apart, broken helmets, splintered crates, scattered papers, and you wonder what stories they carried once, and if anyone will ever know their names. And you hear a sudden crack and dive instinctively to the ground, your heart pounding, and then silence, and you look around, seeing nothing but the empty field and your breath coming fast, and you press on, trying to shake the shadow of fear clinging to your skin, and you pass a shallow shell hole filled with water and see the reflection of the sky broken and rippling, and you think of the men who might have fallen there, and you reach the wire and check it for breaches and traps, your fingers numb but steady, and the wind picks up carrying the distant sound of voices, and you realize it is time to turn back, and as you retrace your steps you feel the weight of the patrol lifting slowly, but the tension remains like a thin inside your chest. And when you finally climb back into the trench, you are met with quiet relief from those waiting, and you exchange tired smiles and the muted clatter of gear being set down, and you sit for a moment letting the ground hold your weight, and the trench walls seem a little less confining now, and the sun breaks through the clouds, sending a weak light into the muddy tunnel. And you close your eyes, imagining the warmth on your skin and the sound of birdsong that you heard once long ago, before all of this, and you feel the exhaustion settle over you like a heavy blanket, and you allow yourself to drift into a restless sleep, holding on to the hope that tomorrow might bring something gentler. The morning light filters weakly through the ragged canvas of the dugout as you slowly awaken to the damp chill that clings to every surface, and you stretch stiff limbs and listen to the distant murmur of activity beyond the trench, and the faint rustling of leaves in a breeze that barely stirs but carries the promise of change, and you rise carefully and check your gear, adjusting straps and buckles while the others around you move with similar silent routine, their faces pale and tired, and you step outside into the narrow trench tunnel, feeling the cold seep into your boots, and you glance upward where the sky is a dull slate and the mud beneath your feet seems endless, and you begin your rounds again, moving past the cramped dugouts and the stacked sandbags, the twisted wire and splintered wood, and the remnants of past battles scattered in every corner, and the smell of wet earth and decay fills your nostrils and mingles with the faint tang of smoke from distant fires, and you think of the men who have passed through this place, their laughter, their fears, their final moments, and you pause for a moment near a faded photograph pinned to a wooden wall, the edges curling and blurred but still holding the image of a smiling face, and you imagine the story behind it. A life lived far away from this place, and the hope it must have carried for the man who kept it close, and you move on, feeling the weight of those untold stories pressing down on you. And then you hear the distant boom of artillery and the trench shudders softly, and you steady yourself against the wall and watch as a cloud of smoke rises over the ridge, and you remind yourself that this is the reality of war, constant and unyielding, and yet beneath the noise there are small moments of strange beauty, the way the rain collects on the leaves turning them to glass, and the soft rustle of the wind through the trees, and the pale light that shifts through the clouds, and you breathe deeply, trying to hold on to those fragments as you continue your walk, and you stop to speak quietly with a comrade about the news from the front and the rumours that swirl like fog around the lines, and you exchange stories and concerns in low tones, trying to keep the fear at bay, and you both glance toward the open land beyond the wire, where the sun breaks through for a moment and illuminates the scarred earth and the skeletal remains of trees, and you think of the families waiting somewhere far away, and the lives interrupted by this endless fight, and then the day drifts forward, with more checks and patrols and the ever-present weight of waiting, and you feel the mud cling more fiercely now, soaking through your clothes, and the air grows heavy and thick, and the flies return in buzzing swarms, adding to the misery. And you hear the cries of a wounded man and rush toward the sound, helping to carry him back to the aid post, and the smell of blood and fear fills the air, and you catch a glimpse of the pain etched deep into his eyes, and you wish you could take it away or share the burden, but you can only offer a steady hand and a quiet word. And as you lay him down, the medic nods grimly, and you feel the weight of helplessness settle over you once again, and the hours pass slowly with the constant tension of shells and sporadic gunfire, and you find yourself staring at the sky, trying to count the stars behind the clouds and to hold on to some thread of normalcy in this chaotic world. And you think about the letters you write home, the ones you hope will bring comfort, and the ones you wonder if anyone will ever read. and you fold the paper carefully and tuck it into your coat pocket, and you try to imagine the moment when this all will end and you'll step out into a world that no longer smells of mud and blood and fear, and you lie back on your cot feeling the ache in your muscles and the tightness in your chest, and you close your eyes, letting the sounds of the trench surround you, the drip of water, the rustle of cloth, the faint whisper of voices, and the distant boom of artillery, like a heartbeat that never stops, and you breathe slowly and deeply, and let yourself drift on the edge of sleep, cradled by the memories and the hope that one day this nightmare will be behind you and the sun will shine on a world made new. The evening descends quietly upon the trench with a cool breeze that carries the scent of damp earth and distant pine, and you sit huddled beneath a frayed blanket, listening to the faint crackle of a small fire struggling against the chill, and the soft murmur of voices exchanging stories and memories that feel like lifelines in the endless grey of this war-torn world. And as the light fades, you watch the shifting shadows dance along the mud-splattered walls, and the distant stars begin to peek through the begathering clouds. And you close your eyes and imagine a sky untouched by the gunfire, a sky where the stars are clear and steady like beacons, guiding lost souls home. And you think about the letters you have sent and the ones you will write tomorrow, and the faces of those you love that fill your mind with warmth, even as your body shivers in the cold and the constant drip of water from a leaking roof reminds you of the relentless passage of time, and you breathe deeply, trying to capture this fragile moment of peace before the storm of tomorrow returns. And your thoughts drift to the rats that skitter through the trench, their beady eyes shining in the darkness, and you recall the stories told around the fire, about them growing bold enough to steal food and even nibble on a sleeping soldier's fingers, and you shudder, but also smile softly at the absurdity of these small creatures surviving alongside you in this place of misery. And you shift your weight and feel the ache in your back and legs, and you remind yourself that every muscle and bone has learned the rhythm of the trench, the endless cycles of waiting, moving, fighting and healing. And you think about the men who have come and gone before you, their names whispered in the quiet hours, and you wonder about the dreams they dared to dream despite the horrors surrounding them, and the love they held on to as tightly as you hold on to hope now. And as the fire dies down, you feel the weight of exhaustion settle like a heavy cloak, and you close your eyes and let the sounds of the trench lull you towards sleep, the drip of water, the rustling of fabric, the distant boom of artillery like a slow and steady heartbeat that connects you to something larger than yourself. And you imagine yourself walking through a forest where the trees sway gently in the breeze, and the leaves whisper soft secrets that only the wind can carry. And you feel the cool grass beneath your feet and the warmth of sunlight filtering through the branches, and you breathe deeply and let yourself sink deeper into this peaceful place where fear and pain cannot follow. And as sleep begins to take hold, you hold on to the hope that tomorrow will bring a new dawn, a new chance for peace, and that this endless night will someday end, and you drift into dreams where the mud no longer clings and the rats are just shadows in the past. And you awake to a world reborn with the light of the sun and the sound of birdsong filling the air with promise. The morning returns without fanfare, just a slow lifting of the dark curtain that reveals more grey sky and slick mud and aching limbs, and you rise quietly and pull your coat tighter against the creeping cold and the breath of your comrades' fogs in the still air, as they too prepare themselves for another day of watching, waiting, digging and enduring. And you hear the faint chime of a tin mug against a mess kit, and the soft murmur of someone reading an old letter aloud, his voice low and cracked with emotion. And you let the sound settle around you like a familiar tune. Though your own hands remain empty for today, there is no news from home, only silence, and the distant roar of artillery that echoes like a storm trapped behind the hills. And you step carefully along the trench boards, your boots already soaked and heavy as you make your way toward the forward post where the air feels tighter, somehow thicker, with tension, and the weight of knowing that this sector has seen too much too often. And you pass men with blank stares and deep lines in their faces, and you nod at them quietly without words because there is nothing left to say that hasn't been said 100 times before. And when you reach the edge of the trench, you pause and look out over no man's land. That awful, desolate strip of earth, torn and scorched and lifeless, except for the occasional flicker of movement that reminds you that the enemy is watching too, always watching, and you duck back down as instinct tells you, and a sharp crack splits the air and a bullet snaps past where your head had been just moments before, and your breath catches and your heart races, but your hands are steady and you move again slowly, methodically, because panic has no place here. Not anymore. And later you help repair part of the trench wall that collapsed overnight from rain and shelling, and your fingers are numb and clumsy with cold and grime, but you keep going because the wall must hold, and if it doesn't, someone could die, and the thought of that's enough to keep you moving. And the sergeant barks orders and curses the mud and the heavens and everything in between. And his voice keeps the rhythm of your labour as if you were digging, not in a trench but on some ancient chain gang, and still you continue because that's what soldiers do, and in the brief pauses between tasks you let your eyes wander to the small things, the way frost coats the wire, the way a lone bird flits across the sky, the way someone has carved a name into the butt of their rifle, and you wonder who they were and what they were thinking when they did it, and if they survived and where they are now. And as the hours pass, you find yourself back near the fire pit where someone has coaxed a few flames from damp wood, and you sit beside it, letting the warmth seep into your bones, and the silence stretches between you and the others. Not uncomfortable, just complete. And one of them offers you a crust of bread, and you take it with a nod, chewing slowly as you all stare into the flames, as if the answers to everything could be found there. And your thoughts wander to the past, to the first days of the war, when uniforms were still clean and laughter still came easily, and death had not yet become so casual, and you remember the boy who used to hum lullabies when he cleaned his rifle, and the man who recited poems in French before each patrol, and the one who carved animals from spare wood and left them for others to find tucked into niches and shelves and corners. And you remember their faces, but not always their names, because too many names have come and gone and faded, and sometimes all you can hold on to is the curve of a smile, or the sound of their voice, or the feel of their presence. And you wonder if anyone will remember you when you are gone, not your rank or your deeds, but the way you laughed or walked or wrote letters or helped repair the trench wall in the cold grey morning. And then the sun begins to dip once more and the light softens, and you gather your coat around you and prepare for another long night, and you settle into your post and close your eyes for a moment, listening to the wind through the wire and the creak of boards under heavy boots and the quiet murmur of men, too tired to speak above a whisper. And the stars begin to appear overhead, dim and flickering behind the smoke and haze, but still they're still shining. The cold deepens as the stars wheel slowly overhead, and you pull your coat tighter around your shoulders and listen to the distant hum of a patrol returning from the far edge of the line, their footsteps heavy and voices hushed as they pass without stopping, shadows among shadows blending into the trench walls as though they were born of the mud and the silence, and you sip from a lukewarm tin of tea, letting the bitter warmth fill your mouth, and your mind drifts to the memory of summer meadows and fireflies and the scent of freshly cut hay, and the laughter of children chasing dogs and kites and dreams before all of this, and the weight of those memories sits heavy on your chest, not with grief but with longing, because it is not death that frightens you anymore. It is forgetting, and you do not want to forget the colour of the sky before dawn, or the sound of church bells on a clear Sunday morning, or the way your mother's hand smelled of flower and lavender when she kissed your cheek and sent you out to play. And here in the trench beneath the stars you try to hold those details tightly like dry leaves in a storm, knowing that each day here chips away at what you used to be and what you still hope to become, and your thoughts are broken by the sharp whistle of the watch changing, and you rise stiffly, joints creaking and muscles sore, and you take your place on the firing step, your eyes scanning the darkness beyond the parapet, the shadows that shift and twitch like nervous creatures, and every creak of wire or rustle of cloth could be a sign of something moving just beyond your vision, and you keep still, barely breathing, listening with every part of you. And the wind moans low through the splintered boards and carries with it faint sounds from the enemy trench, the cough of a soldier, the clatter of a dropped tool, the echo of footsteps, and though you cannot see them, you know they are there just like you, cold and tired and afraid and trying to remember their own small pieces of a life left behind, and the realization of that shared humanity is both comfort and curse, because it means there are no monsters here, only men, and men bleed and cry and beg and die, and it would be easier if they didn't, and so you stare into the dark and grip your rifle and wait as the hours slip by, and the moon climbs higher and the fog begins to settle along the bottom of the trench, clinging to boots and rising slowly like a tide of ghosts, and the rats come out again bold and quick, darting between crates and bodies and shadows, their tiny claws tapping across wooden planks like drumbeats, and one of them pauses to stare at you, its eyes glinting and curious, and you stare back unblinking until it scurries away and is gone, and you lower your eyes and try to focus on your breathing, slow and even, letting each exhale blend with the cold night air, and you count them one by one, imagining each breath carries away a sliver of your fear, until you are light enough to float above the trench, above the barbed wire, above the war itself, and you are walking again, this time through a quiet orchard, where the trees bloom pale under the moonlight and the wind smells of apples and rain and no one is dying and nothing is broken, and you move through that dream with the careful reverence of someone who knows it could vanish at any moment, and it does, because a flare goes up, suddenly spilling white light across the trench and the no man's land, and every shadow jumps and twists like a frightened animal, and you press yourself lower instinctively, heart pounding as you wait for the light to fade, and when it does, the darkness rushes back in thick and suffocating, and you blink and your grip tightens on your rifle, and you listen again more sharply this time, every sound now a potential warning, every silence a trap, and your eyes ache from the strain and your shoulders burn from tension, but still you hold and still you wait, because that's the only thing left to do. And when finally your shift ends and you climb down from the firing step, you feel as if you have aged years in a single watch, and you sink onto your cot in the dugout and curl yourself into the thinnest shape possible, as if shrinking could shield you from the weight of everything pressing in. And you hear someone humming an old lullaby softly and brokenly, and the sound carries you gently towards sleep as the trench settles into its uneasy stillness, and above you the sky remains unchanged, vast and quiet and distant. The morning arrives as a smear of dull grey light bleeding slowly into the corners of the dugout, and you open your eyes to the damp staleness of the air, and the soft clatter of tin cups and boots on duckboards, and the groan of men waking from restless sleep and stretching stiff limbs in the confines of the earthen walls, and you rise slowly, feeling every ache and bruise as you brush the dirt from your uniform and pull your coat tighter against the chill that seems to live in your very bones now. Then you step out into the trench and blink against the hazy dawn, and the familiar chorus greets you again. The cough of a soldier with trench lung, the drip of water from the sandbags above the rustle of rats, and the shouts of the cook trying to organise a line for rations. And the trench feels smaller today, narrower somehow, heavier, as though the weight of last night's dreams still clings to every wall and every wooden plank, and you walk past the latrine and wrinkle your nose against the foulness, though you've grown used to it. And further on you pass a chalkboard where someone has scrawled the day's orders in thick, crude letters beneath it. A joke is scratched out, something dark and bitter, and no one laughs as they pass it. And you think about how humour has become a kind of armour here, like the crust of mud on your boots. It shields you from things you cannot change, and things you dare not speak aloud, and you reach the supply corner and wait your turn as a corporal hands out tins of bully beef and hardtack, and you trade a cigarette for an extra biscuit and mutter thanks before moving on, and you take a seat on a plank near a dugout entrance where the breeze stirs the steam from your tea, and you eat without tasting, just swallowing and chewing like a machine because your body demands it and your mind is too tired to care, and around you others do the same, eyes down, mouths, silent movements, slow and automatic, as if all of you are caught in some grim clockwork. And when breakfast is done, you are handed a shovel and assigned to repair the wire at the front edge of the trench, and the mud clings to your boots and sucks at your steps as you make your way forward, every footfall a small battle, and the wire is twisted and torn from the last shelling. And it takes hours to pull it straight and weave in the new coils and drive in new stakes, and all the while the wind moans softly and the sky remains low and heavy and distant. Gunfire rumbles like thunder on the horizon, and you don't speak because there's nothing to say and no energy left to say it with. And when the work is done, you return to the main trench and wipe your hands on your coat and find a place to sit in the shadow of a collapsed corner where a fellow soldier sits whittling a piece of wood into the shape of a bird. And he doesn't look up when you join him, just keeps carving slowly with hands that tremble slightly, and you watch him for a while, then pull out your notebook and begin a letter. Not because you know what to say, but because the act of writing helps you remember that you are still more than just a uniform in the mud, and the words come slowly at first, awkward and halting, but then they flow memories of home, of the garden, after rain, of your sister's laugh, of your father's workshop, of a blue scarf that smelled like spring, and you don't write about the blood or the gas or the boy who lost his legs yesterday, or the look in his eyes when he realised what was missing. You leave that out because you don't want the war to bleed into the paper and stain the places you love, and when the letter is done you fold it carefully and tuck it into your breast pocket and stare out across the trench and the wire and the distant line of trees that mark the horizon, and you let your eyes soften and your mind drift to a quiet room with a warm fire and books on the shelf and rain against the window, and you're sitting there wrapped in a blanket, and everything is still and safe and silent except for the occasional crackle of the hearth and the turning of a page, and the vision is so clear that for a moment you forget the mud beneath you and the cries in the distance and the weight of your gear pressing into your shoulders, and then a whistle blows and you are pulled back into the trench and the captain is calling names and yours is one of them, and you rise automatically, boots squelching in the muck, and fall into line with the others. Your heart steady, your hands calm, because fear is a luxury you no longer afford, and you march forward into the next task, the next hour, the next endless day. The patrol is small and silent, a ripple of shadows moving just above the trench line as you slip over the parapet and into the wet hollow of the no man's land, crouching low as the cold damp of the ground seeps into your knees and elbows, and the only sound is the soft whisper of boots against earth, and breath held tight in lungs, afraid to disturb the heavy hush that hangs over everything like fog, and your fingers close around the strap of your rifle tighter than they need to, and you tell yourself it is only caution, not fear, but you know better, and beside you the others move in rhythm, practiced and slow eyes scanning the dark for movement, for the glint of a wire, or the shape of a helmet, or the flicker of a match, and the night stretches wide around you, thick with damp and threat and memory, and your foot brushes against something and unyielding, and you freeze. Breath caught in your throat and reach down, and your fingers find fabric and then bone. And you know it is someone who once had a name, a voice, a laugh, someone who walked and wrote and maybe loved once. And now he is just shape and cloth and silence, and you close your eyes for a breath and keep moving, because to stop would be to break, and there is no time for breaking. And the patrol moves along the line toward a gap where the wire has fallen, and there is a need to mark it, to watch it, to listen near it, because rumours of enemy movement have stirred the officers, and they want eyes out here in the dark, and you reach the point and settle behind a fallen beam, part of a shattered tree. Maybe its limbs twisted like hands clawing toward the sky, and you press your body into the cold mud and let the night wrap around you. And for a time there is only your breathing, and the breathing of the man beside you, and the occasional scurry of a rat brave enough to wander this cursed strip of land, and you try not to think about how close you are to their trench, or how thin the veil between waiting and dying can be out here. And your mind begins to wander, as it always does when the body is still and the world is not, and you remember a field of tall grass beneath a sky, bursting with clouds, and the way it felt to run barefoot across warm earth wind in your face. Laughter on your tongue, and you remember your brother calling to you from the edge of the river, daring you to jump, and the shock of water cold and clean and alive, and the way your heart soared as you broke the surface and blinked up at the light, and that memory is so vivid that for a heartbeat you forget where you are until a flare cracks open the sky, bathing the land in ghost light, and you press your face to the ground, heart slamming against your ribs as shadows stretch long and strange, and nothing moves, and the light fades and silence roars in its place. And when you lift your head again, the night is darker than before, and you realise you've bitten your lip hard enough to taste blood, and you wipe it away with the back of your glove and shift your weight carefully, checking your surroundings, eyes, sharp ears tuned to every rustle and creak and distant moan. And still the world turns and nothing happens, and hours pass in that state of hyper-awareness where time distorts and minutes feel like eternities, and your limbs ache, and your mind numbs, and still you stay and wait and hold. And when the relief patrol finally arrives, you almost don't believe it, but the soft tap of a signal and the whispered code is real, and you rise from your hiding place and follow them back, crawling, then crouching, then running the final few feet until you are over the parapet and back into the wet womb of the trench. And only when your boots hit the duckboard do you allow yourself to breathe again, and someone claps your shoulder and says, "Good work," in a voice that doesn't quite match the sentiment, and you nod and move past them down into the dugout where the heat of bodies and the smell of oil and earth wrap around you like a thick blanket, and you sink onto a bench and rest your rifle against the wall, and someone hands you a mug, and you drink without asking what's in it, and it burns a path down your throat and pulls the chill from your chest, and for the first time in hours you close your eyes and let yourself be still, and the dugout hums with the low rustle of cards being shuffled, the soft murmur of voices too tired to rise above a whisper, and the occasional curse when the lantern flickers low and someone loses their hand, and you sit among it all, heart still pounding, ears still ringing, eyes still adjusting, and slowly, slowly you begin to remember that you are still alive. The next morning comes without ceremony, a grey hush settling over the trench, as though the world itself is holding its breath, and you wake to the sound of boots splashing through puddles and the low groan of the wind weaving through the boards above, and you sit up slowly, brushing off the clinging damp from your coat as you stretch limbs that feel older than they should, and your back pops and your neck aches, and the first thing you notice is the smell of gas, still faint but present like the aftertaste of a nightmare that refuses to fade, and someone shouts from the far end of the trench, calling for a check on masks, and you reach instinctively for yours, making sure it's dry, not cracked, no holes, and you tie it to your belt just in case before stepping out into the narrow corridor of mud and wood and men and rats. And as you walk, the trench seems quieter than usual. Men moving slowly, speaking in low voices, eyes tired and far away, and even the rats seem subdued. Their usual scurrying now, just the occasional twitch of motion in a corner, and the cook has managed a pot of something hot, and you take a tinful and hold it close, letting the steam warm your face before taking a careful sip, and it tastes like salt and ash, but it's warm and that's enough. And across from you, someone is writing again, bent low over their lap pencil, moving in short, urgent strokes as though trying to catch a thought before it slips away. And further on, someone else tunes a battered harmonica, letting the first notes float up and twist through the air like smoke. And for a moment you close your eyes and pretend you are somewhere else. A town square maybe, or a porch in the sun, but the illusion doesn't last long. And soon the trench asserts itself again with a fresh waft of decay, and the sight of new sandbags torn and soaked and sagging, and the sound of artillery far off but steady, like the beating of a mechanical heart. And word comes down that you're on stretcher duty again this time, not for the front, but to assist with the wounded who've begun to pile up near the medical dugout, too many too fast, and not enough hands, and not enough morphine, and not enough anything. And you take the stretcher with another man, a quiet one named Reynolds, who barely speaks unless spoken to, and you walk toward the dugout where the cries begin before you even reach the entrance, and you steel yourself as you step inside and the heat hits you. First thick and sour with blood and sweat and fear, and the groans come next. Some sharps and wet and gurgling, some quiet and terrible like prayers turned inside out, and the medics are moving fast, sleeves rolled up, faces pale and shining with effort, and someone shouts for more bandages, and someone else shouts for water, and your name is called, and you move to the first man, his leg gone and his eyes wide and wild, and you kneel beside him and slip your hands under his shoulders, and your partner takes the feet, or what's left of them, and you lift and carry and set him gently down in the holding area, and go back for the next, and the next, and the next. And every face is a story, every wound a sentence cut off before its time, and you don't speak, you don't flinch, you just move like a cog in the machine, because to pause would be to feel, and to feel would be to break. And when finally the worst is done, you step outside and let the cool air bite into your skin, and you wipe your hands on your trousers, and taste bile in your throat, and someone passes you a flask, and you drink without question, and it burns clean and hard, and for a moment everything blurs and softens, and then the moment is gone, and the sharpness returns, and you go to your post and take up your rifle and stare out over the trench edge where nothing moves except the wind through barbed wire, and the memory of the men you carried, and the sound of the harmonica drifting faintly behind you like a song you once knew, but have since forgotten the words to. That night the rain returns not as a storm, but as a slow, constant whisper that sinks into every surface, every fold of fabric, every crack in the boards above your head, and the trench becomes a ribbon of sludge again, water pooling ankle-deep in some places, waist-deep in others, and men wade through it silently, teeth chattering, breath steaming from their mouths like ghosts, and you pull your coat tighter around you, though. It does little to keep out the cold, and the damp finds you anyway, creeping up your spine into your joints like a second skin. And the sky above is a dark curtain stretched tight without moon or stars, only the occasional pulse of distant shellfire staining the clouds with brief colour. And your shift has you posted at the edge of a listening post, a narrow little recess cut into the wall of the trench, shielded by sandbags and duckboards, with just enough room for one man to sit and another to kneel beside him. And you slide into position, pressing your back against the earth, your boots sinking slowly into the muck, and beside you a private you don't know. Offers a nod but no words, and you return the nod and settle in the night, stretching out in all directions, and soon your ears begin to pick up the sounds that live beneath. Silence, the drip of water from the edge of a helmet, the shiver of canvas in the wind, the distant mutter of movement too far to place, and you lean forward listening, straining every sense for something, for anything, and your thoughts begin to unravel slowly and without permission, drifting first to letters home, and whether your last was received, and whether her reply is sitting now on some officer's desk waiting to be delivered, and then to food and the shape of your mother's hands as she worked bread dough by the window, and the memory of your brother's laugh, sharp and sudden like birds taking flight, and then to nothing, just the thick blank quiet of a tired mind and heavy limbs. And somewhere in that space between thought and sleep a figure appears in the dark, moving low and slow across no man's land, and you freeze. Hand tightening around your rifle, heart surging in your chest as you squint through the gloom, and nudge your partner, who sees it too, and together you hold your breath, watching as the figure stops, crawls a little further, then lies still, and you wait. not daring to blink, not daring to move, and after several minutes you realise it's a body not alive, not dangerous, just another soul lost and caught in the middle, and your breath leaves you in a long, slow sigh, and you shift again, leaning back and letting your head rest against the sodden wall, your eyes closing for a moment, just a moment. And when they open again, dawn is beginning to bleed into the sky and the shadows soften, and the edges of the world return, and you switch out with the next pair and return to the dugout. Your legs stiff, your fingers numb, and inside you find someone humming an old song low and steady as they pour tea into metal mugs, and you take one without speaking and sit by the stove where a small fire still crackles and pops, and you wrap your hands around the heat and drink slowly, letting the warmth spread back into your limbs. And as the rest of the trench wakes, there is a weariness in the air, thicker than soul and smoke, heavier than mud, and it clings to everyone's shoulders, and no one mentions the bodies. No one mentions the rain, no one mentions the rumours of another push coming in 2 days' time. Instead they focus on boots that need repair or rations that must be sorted, or the latest joke from the rear lines, and these little distractions become the thread that holds everything together, the fragile weave of normal in a place where nothing is normal, and you hold on to them tightly, afraid that if you let go you might disappear into the grey, just another name scratched into wood, just another whisper carried on the wind. 2 days later the order comes just after sunrise, crisp and official, delivered by a runner with mud to his knees and eyes that won't meet yours, and you know before he even speaks that the push is real and near and terrible, and the officers confirm it with their stiff voices and clipped phrases, maps spread over crates, fingers pointing to lines and arrows, and circles drawn in red and blue, and words like objective and timetable and acceptable loss, and you stand there staring at the paper, listening as though from far away, while the trench hums around you with a sudden new energy, part fear, part inevitability, and everyone begins preparing cleaning weapons, checking gear, folding letters and tucking them into pockets or boots or under helmets just in case. And someone sharpens a bayonet with steady hands, and someone else mutters a prayer over and over like a rhythm, and someone else starts to cry softly, shoulders shaking as they sit on a crate looking at nothing. And the sergeant walks by offering a tight nod and a word of encouragement that feels hollow but necessary. And you find yourself at the foot of the ladder staring up at the pale light above, thinking not about glory or country or even death, but about how cold the air will be when you climb, and whether your boots will slip on the mud, and how long it will take before the shelling starts and then the whistle blows and everything breaks open at once. A great roar rising like a beast from the depths, and you surge up the ladder with the others, your body moving before your mind can catch up, and the world explodes around you, dirt and fire and steel falling like rain, and men shouting and running and falling, and the ground becomes a blur of motion and sound and impact, and you run forward tripping over wire and limbs and broken crates, and the sky is screaming, and your heart is hammering, and your lungs burn with effort and smoke, and you reach the first crater and drop into it, knees slamming hard into the earth, and you press your back against the mud, panting, listening for the next signal, and then you climb again, pushing forward as machine gun fire rips through the air, and someone beside you jerks backward with a noise like a cough and goes still, and you do not stop. You cannot stop, and the objective is a line of trees barely visible through the haze, and you reach it eventually barely knowing how you got there, and drop behind a root system gnarled and broken, and there you stay until the shelling pauses long enough to move again, and the order comes to fall back to the new line, and you rise and move, dragging yourself over the ground, half crawling, half stumbling, until you are back behind the trench wall, and the medics are shouting for stretchers, and the wounded are everywhere, and the wounded are screaming, and the trench is no longer a place of rest, but a hospital of the damned, and you are covered in mud and blood, and you cannot tell whose it is, and the officer counts heads and names and numbers, and the gaps between them are wide and sobering, and when he reaches yours you say, "Present." But your voice cracks and your body trembles, and that night there is no song, no story, no laughter, only silence broken by the occasional sob or mutter or prayer, and you lie in your dugout staring at the ceiling as rain begins to fall again, steady and unyielding, and you think of home not as a place but as an idea, as something warm and dry and far away and unreachable, and your thoughts drift and shift and slip, and you let them carry you away from here, even just for a moment, even just in your mind. The morning after the push begins like every other, with the dull grey light seeping in through the slats of the trench roof, and the slow-rising groan of men waking from sleep that never truly rested them, and you sit up slowly, your shoulders aching, your legs stiff with dried mud, and you listen not for birds or bells or anything familiar from the world before, but for the distant rattle of artillery, or the closer shuffle of boots through muck, and the trench is quieter than it was the day before, the air thick with a kind of quiet that presses against your skin like weight, and you step out into the corridor of dirt and wood and wire and smoke where a medic is tending to a wounded man with bandages the colour of rust, and a runner is passing by with a note clutched in one hand, and you see someone sketching again using a broken bit of charcoal on the inside of a ration box, tracing not faces or scenes but lines that seem to mean something only to him, and someone else is singing under their breath. A song in a language you do not know, and it rises and falls like the sea, and for a moment it brings you calm, not because you understand the words, but because the melody feels older than the war, older than this world even, and you take your breakfast, if it can be called that. A handful of biscuit and tea so thin it looks like smoke, and you eat in silence, staring out across the trench lip where the land beyond is nothing but torn earth and shattered tree stumps and bodies strewn like discarded dolls, and the rats have grown bolder, fat and sleek and fearless, moving openly among the dead and the wounded, gnawing at boots and belts and even flesh, and no one has the strength or will to chase them off anymore. And when you are assigned to wire duty again, you nod and gather your tools, stepping into the narrow sap trench that leads out toward no man's land. Your hands moving by instinct now, clipping and tying and threading the long thin wire that coils like a serpent between your fingers, and every few minutes you stop and listen, not just for sound but for silence, for the way the air changes when something is near. And your partner today is a boy from Minnesota who talks too much, but his voice is kind and it reminds you of someone, and you let him speak, filling the space with words about fishing and baseball, and his sister's laugh and the way maple trees look in the fall, and you nod along answering. When you can, feeling the way the words smooth over the jagged edges inside you, and the work continues and the day passes, and by the time you return to the trench again you are soaked through, your coat heavy with water and your boots squelching with every step, and the officer nods his approval, and someone passes you a tin of stew that tastes mostly of onions, and you eat it slowly, letting the warmth gather in your belly, and someone starts a fire in the corner of the dugout and the men gather around it, their faces hollow and red in the flickering light, and one of them begins to read from a letter from home, his voice soft and shaking, and as he speaks you close your eyes, not to sleep but to listen more deeply, hearing the scratch of pen on paper, and the way the words catch in his throat when he says, "I miss you, and we pray for you," and the fire cracks, and the smoke curls upward, and you feel the ache in your bones settle for just a moment, and you breathe deeply, letting the sound of rain and rustling and breath become the world and nothing else. And that night's sleep takes you more gently than usual, not with violence or fear, but with a kind of quiet surrender, as though your body understands there is nothing more to give, and for the first time in weeks your dreams are not of war, but of trees and rivers and open fields untouched by boots or shells or blood. And in that dream you are running free, your feet light on dry grass, the sun on your face and a voice. And a distance calling your name, not in alarm or urgency, but in love and welcome, and you follow it until the light fades and the quiet returns. In the final weeks before the armistice, the trench changes again, not in shape or structure, but in feeling, in the way the men move, the way they speak, the way they wait, because now there are whispers of peace, not just idle hope or rumour, but real words from high command, letters intercepted, stories passed from post to post that maybe the end is coming, and no one knows what to do with that. Not really, because for so long the war was everything. It filled every hour, every breath, every heartbeat, and now the idea of it stopping seems stranger than the idea of it going on. And you find yourself watching the sky more often now, trying to guess what kind of sky ends a war, and one morning the shelling slows, then stops altogether. For a full hour, and in that hour the silence is so loud it stuns the birds into stillness, and the rats into hiding, and the men into looking at each other with something like fear, because without the war, what are we, and when the guns begin again, it is almost a relief, because at least that is known, that is understood, and still the whispers grow stronger, louder, more urgent, and the officers are quieter now too, their shoulders slumping a little, their orders coming slower as if they too are waiting, and you keep to your duties, your rotations, your watch, your boots and bayonet and rations, but now every movement feels soaked in. Maybe this is the last time, maybe today is the end, and then one morning in November the rain lets up the clouds, part just a little, and the message arrives clear and simple and final: hostilities will cease at 11, and you read the words once, then again, and you say them aloud to the others, and no one believes them. Not at first, not really, and even as the hands of the watch move closer to the hour you still listen for the trick, the sudden blast, the last betrayal. But then the clock strikes 11, and the guns do not fire and the sky does not tear open, and instead there is stillness, pure and full and deep as snow. And one by one men rise, not just in your trench, but across the line, and they look up and they breathe, and some laugh, and some weep, and some fall to their knees in the mud, unable to stand under the weight of the quiet. And you stand to your legs trembling and your face wet with tears you did not know were coming, and you look at the faces around you and they are as worn and scarred and stained as yours, and you realise that no matter what comes next, no matter what peace looks like or how it feels, you are bound to them not by war but by survival, by the long, cruel hours of waiting and the moments of terror and the spaces in between where humanity still flickered, and later after the officers confirm it and the chaplain gives thanks, and the wounded are tended to without fear of more shelling. You walk up the trench steps for the first time without crouching, without checking the sky, without holding your breath, and you step onto no man's land where the ground is torn and bitter and broken, and yet in the silence you see flowers already returning, tiny stubborn things pushing up through the wreckage, as if to say, even here, life remembers how to live, and you bend down and touch one, your fingers brushing the petals, and for the first time in years your hands are still. And when you look up, you see men from the other side stepping forward too, not with rifles, but with cautious wonder. And for a moment no one speaks, and then someone says hello, and someone else says home, and the words hang in the air soft and new and full of everything you have forgotten how to say. And that night in the dugout, though, the war is over. You sleep in your uniform on your cot by the stove, and the fire still crackles, and someone still hums, and someone else writes a letter, and you close your eyes and listen to the sound of nothing, the blessed quiet, the breath of a world exhaling, and in that sound you find peace. Not perfect, not easy, but real, and you let it hold you gently as you drift into sleep.